All right, let's dive in. Today, we're looking into a case it's really captured the internet's attention for years now. Elisa Lam's death, it's just shrouded in so much mystery. Sent over a podcast script about it. And yeah, just glancing through it, there are some really strange details that jump out at you right away. So we're talking about Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student traveling through California back in January 2013. And what's interesting is she was documenting everything, her whole trip, on a Tumblr blog, sharing her thoughts, experiences, even mentioning her struggles with bipolar disorder.
Yeah, her blog, it really gives us this kind of, I don't know, almost like a personal look into who she was before all this happened, before she disappeared.
Right, and then things take this really, really dark turn. Elise was staying at the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. And well, Cecil, it's not exactly known for being a, peaceful getaway spot. I mean, with its history of suicides and connections to, big-name serial killers.
It's pretty jarring to think about her being there. Especially when you read her blog. She seemed, I don't know, like a thoughtful person, introspective. You wouldn't picture that kind of person choosing the Cecil.
Exactly. It's such a weird contrast, And then on January 31st, 2013, she just vanished. Missed all her regular check-ins with family. And the LAPD, they got involved, started investigating, and the case, it really started gaining traction, especially after the security camera footage came out from one of the hotel elevators on February 13th.
Oh, that footage is like one of the most talked about pieces of evidence in the whole case. It's just, she's pressing all these buttons, looking out of the elevator like she's searching for someone, hiding in the corner at one point, and then the door, they keep malfunctioning, opening and closing. Chilling is a good word for it, I think.
Yeah, it's almost like something out of a horror movie, Staged. It's fueled so many theories. Was someone following her? Was it a psychotic episode, something related to her bipolar disorder? Or was there something else going on, something more deliberate, more sinister?
It's important to remember, bipolar disorder, it can manifest in so many ways. We can't just assume things based on that diagnosis. Got to look at all the evidence.
Okay, so we have this young woman. She has this history of mental health struggles. She's staying in this hotel with this super dark past, and then she disappears. But not before acting strangely in an elevator. It's like the setup for a mystery novel, right?
And it doesn't get any less mysterious from there. On February 19th, they found her body up on the hotel roof in one of the water tanks.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that discovery must have been shocking. But it's not just the location, it's all the details. Her body, it was naked, clothes floating nearby. The tank lid was closed. And getting up to the roof, well, access was supposed to be restricted. It's just how?
Those are some of the biggest questions in the whole case. Officially, the coroner ruled it an accidental drowning with bipolar disorder as a contributing factor. Toxicology report, it showed traces of her meds. Nothing unusual, no drugs or alcohol. But even with that, you can understand why people still have doubts.
It's not exactly a clear-cut case, is it? And the Cecil Hotel, it's like adding fuel to the fire.
Oh, absolutely. The Cecil and its history, it's hard to ignore the possibility of foul play.
Right. I mean, it's like another chapter in the Cecil's dark story. But then there's also the theory about the elevator and her death. Maybe it was all a mental health crisis. Like, what if she was having a severe episode and somehow it led her to that water tank?
It's definitely something to consider.
Yeah.
But we have to remember, we're working with limited information. We don't know what she was experiencing in those days leading up to it, or what might have triggered anything.
So it's like we have these puzzle pieces, but some are missing. And of course, with a mystery like this, there are always, theories.
There are a lot out there, some more plausible than others. Some people, they point to the hotel's past, lax security, and they say, look, this was foul play. And then there are the more, I guess you could say, out there theories. The paranormal stuff, the Cecil's reputation as being haunted.
Yeah, it's easy to see how a place like that could spark those kinds of theories. I mean, they even rebranded the hotel, tried to distance themselves from the past, called it Stay on Main. But it didn't really erase anything, did it? And then there's the Dark Water connection.
Right, that 2005 horror film Dark Water. The plot. There's a body found in a water tank.
Yeah, the similarities to Elisa's case are, well, they're pretty chilling. It makes you wonder, do these kinds of things, these coincidences, do they mean anything? Or are we just trying to find patterns where there aren't any?
It's something to think about, that's for sure.
It is. So let's go back to the official ruling for a second.
The accidental drowning.
Right. But even with that ruling, there are still so many unanswered questions.
And then there's the human side of it all. This young woman dealing with her own struggles, traveling alone and ending up in this place. We have to consider all of that.
Absolutely. And on top of everything else, there's this hotel, this presence, the Cecil looming over the entire case, almost like it's a character itself.
Exactly, like it's whispering in our ear, telling us these stories of tragedy and, I don't know, darkness, making it even harder to see things clearly.
So, what do you think? Are we looking at a tragic accident, but one that's made more complex by the circumstances? Or is there something else going on, something we're missing?
That's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. But before we try to answer that, let's go back to that elevator footage. It sparked so much speculation. But is it really as strange as people make it out to be?
That's a great question. I think we need to break it down a bit more before we can really understand its significance.
Agreed. Let's take a closer look, see if we can separate fact from fiction.
Okay, let's do it.
So that elevator footage, right? It's been analyzed frame by frame. Internet sleuths, they've gone over it with a fine-tooth comb, and it's spawned some pretty wild theories. But when you really think about it, we're only seeing this tiny little piece of what happened that day, just through the lens of that security camera.
Yeah, that's true. It's easy to forget that we're missing a lot of context. No audio, right? So we don't know what might have been going on in the hallway or if she was talking to someone.
Exactly. We're left filling in the blanks ourselves.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a lot of, assumptions.
Plus, we're watching it knowing how it all ends, right? That definitely changes how you see things. Like when you're watching a movie and you already know who the killer is, suddenly every little thing seems suspicious.
Exactly. We try to connect the dots. It's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we're dealing with something like this, a tragedy. But sometimes those connections, they might not be so clear-cut.
So what are some other explanations then for her behavior in the elevator?
Okay, well, what if she was just disoriented? Think about it. The Cecil, it was a big, confusing building. Easy to get lost, especially if you're not familiar with the layout.
That's true. And she was traveling alone, right? No one to ask for directions or anything.
Right. Or maybe she was having trouble with the elevator itself, buttons sticking, or maybe she thought someone was outside and she was trying to avoid them. We've all been in those situations, right? Feeling a little uneasy in an elevator, especially if you're in a new city.
And Cecil was in a, let's be honest, kind of rough area. That probably didn't help her anxiety.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And then there's the bipolar disorder. We can't forget that. It's possible her actions were influenced by her mental state.
Okay, so I'm not an expert, but I know bipolar disorder can present in a lot of different ways. What are some common misconceptions about it that might be relevant here?
Well, a lot of people think it's you're always either super high or super low, But it's actually way more complex than that. There can be periods of stability. And the severity of episodes, it can vary a lot from person to person.
So we can't just assume she was constantly having extreme mood swings or acting erratically.
Right. And even during an episode, people can still function to a degree. They can hold conversations, go to work, even travel. They might be struggling internally, but you wouldn't necessarily know it.
It's a spectrum, right? Everyone experiences it differently.
Absolutely. And it's so important not to stigmatize it or make assumptions about someone based solely on a diagnosis.
So back to the elevator footage, it sounds like there are a lot of explanations that don't involve, foul play or something paranormal.
Right. It's strange, definitely unsettling, but we need to look at it critically, consider all the angles.
Not just the sensational ones. So let's say for a minute that the footage isn't the key to this whole thing. What else should we be focusing on?
Well, I think the biggest mystery, the one that really gets to people, is how she ended up in that water tank.
Yeah, that's the part that just doesn't make sense. It's not like those tanks were easy to get into.
No, they weren't. Restricted access, heavy lid. It doesn't sound like you could just accidentally fall in.
And she was naked, clothes floating nearby. It just adds another layer of strangeness to it all.
It's one of the most perplexing details, for sure. Some people think maybe she was trying to get help or escape something. Disoriented, panicking, shedding her clothes.
But wouldn't someone have heard something? The Cecil wasn't exactly known for being quiet.
True, but maybe it happened during a quieter time. Or her cries for help, they just went unnoticed. And the security there, well, it wasn't great. It's possible someone could have gotten up to the roof without being seen.
It's frustrating, We just don't have enough information to answer these questions, all these clues, but no clear path to the truth.
And that's what keeps people coming back to this case, trying to piece it all together, hoping to find that one missing piece that makes everything click.
Like a collective obsession almost,
Yeah.
with finding an explanation, even if it's, beyond logic.
Maybe. But it also shows how much we want to make sense of tragedy. To find meaning in the chaos, even if that meaning is hard to grasp.
Okay, so we've talked about the elevator, the water tank, and just how hard it is to put this all together with the limited information we have. But there's one thing that keeps coming back, figuratively and literally. The Cecil Hotel itself.
Ah, yes, the Cecil. More than just a setting, it's like a character in this story. This place with a dark past, a history that seems to attract these strange and tragic events.
Do you think it's possible for a place to, absorb the energy of what's happened there? To become like a repository for darkness and despair?
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Whether you believe in haunted places or not, there's no denying that some places have a certain atmosphere, a feeling that you just can't shake.
And the Cecil's history, it's so full of tragedy, it's easy to see why people would think it's cursed or haunted. But beyond that, the sensational stuff, there are real reasons why the hotel declined. Real reasons why it became associated with crime and violence.
Right, we have to consider the social and economic context, too. The Cecil was in an area that had been struggling for decades. Poverty, crime, it was all there. And the hotel, it became like a reflection of those bigger issues. Attracting a transient population, struggling with security.
So it's not just about ghosts and ghouls then. There are real-world explanations for why the Cecil became, a magnet for trouble.
Exactly, and it's important to remember that, especially when we're talking about Elisa's case.
We can't ignore those social and economic factors. They might have played a role too.
It's about looking at the bigger picture, understanding how individual lives are shaped by the forces around them.
And with the Cecil, those forces were, often pretty dark. So how does this all connect back to Elisa? What can we learn about her case by understanding the Cecil's history and its place in the bigger picture?
Well, for one thing, it helps us see her as more than just a victim. She was a real person making choices that led her to that place at that time. Choices that might have been influenced by her struggles, her financial situation, maybe even just a desire for adventure.
It reminds us that even in the face of tragedy, there's always a human story there.
And that story, it's often more complex than we might realize at first.
Okay, so let's shift our focus back to Elisa for a minute. We've talked about her blog, her bipolar disorder, the choices she made, but what else can we learn about her, about who she was as a person?
That's where things get really interesting, because we might never know exactly what happened to her, but we can try to understand her better by looking at the pieces of her life that are left behind.
Like little breadcrumbs scattered across her blog posts, her travel plans, what people who knew her have said. It's like we're trying to put together a mosaic, one tiny tile at a time.
And each tile, each piece of information, it might hold a clue to the bigger picture. So let's see what we can find.
It's like we're detectives, right? Trying to piece together these clues from her life to figure out who she was and what brought her to the Cecil.
It is kind of like that, yeah. We have these little glimpses into her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. It's all scattered throughout those blog posts.
And what's interesting is they paint this picture of someone who was, both adventurous and kind of introspective at the same time, loved to travel, see new places, but she was also dealing with these internal struggles.
Yeah, you see that mix of light and dark in her writing. Moments of joy and then these reflections on her mental health, the challenges of living with bipolar disorder. She was complex, that's for sure. Embraced the good and the bad.
You can definitely sense her vulnerability when you read her posts. That desire to connect with people, to find her place.
That's something a lot of us can relate to, I think. Trying to figure out where we fit in, what it all means. It's a pretty universal theme.
It is, and that's part of what makes her story so captivating, It's not just about solving a mystery, it's about trying to understand what it means to be human.
Exactly. And we have to remember, Elisa, she was more than just a victim. She had a whole life. A life that went beyond what happened at the Cecil.
Relationships, experiences, dreams. We might never know exactly why she died, but we can try to understand who she was.
That's a good way to put it. Honoring her memory by trying to learn about her life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the, I guess you could say, key takeaways? What do you hope our listener walks away with?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we won't have all the answers. We can analyze, theorize, try to make sense of things. But some questions, they just might stay unanswered.
And that's okay, right? It's okay to be comfortable with not knowing everything.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean we stop searching, right? For truth, for meaning, for a better understanding of the world and ourselves.
It's almost like those unanswered questions can lead to even bigger discoveries,
Absolutely. Embracing the mystery, being okay with the unknown. Sometimes the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
So to our listener out there, I hope this deep dive has made you think, maybe challenged some of your assumptions, sparked your curiosity.
Elisa Lamb's story reminds us that every life is this tapestry, woven together with joy and sorrow, success and struggle. And even though her life was cut short, it still has so much to teach us.
Yeah.
About the fragility of life, the importance of empathy, of understanding.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mysterious death of Elisa Lam. We hope you'll keep exploring this case, keep thinking about it, and hey, maybe someday we'll finally uncover the truth behind it all.